Homestead and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about Essenes, Sadducees, Pharisees, Zealots, Hebrew scriptures, a few other things. Okay, this comes from a comment that I got from Joyce Zabriskie. And by the way, Joyce, Zabriskie is my great-grandma's maiden name, so we may be related, possibly. But anyway, um, she says, wasn't Christ in Essene, which had purification rituals, or were Essenes part of Nazirite? And the answer to that is no. The Nazirite vow is like a general individual vow. It's not really a group. It's just for whatever reason, if you felt prompted to become a Nazirite, then you would do it, or your parents before you were born could offer you as a Nazirite, as was the case of Samuel the prophet. Hannah said that she would dedicate him to the Lord, and he was a Nazirite. Okay, so a Nazirite is a personal vow. It's found in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, and I see that you saw the video, so you already know that. So I'm just going to give kind of a general overview of what these groups are, how they differed from each other. And from what I can tell, they mostly formed in the century or two leading up to the time of Christ. Now, for a detailed history of Judaism in general, including these groups, I would recommend this channel. This is Henry Abramson, and he is really good. First of all, he has a great personality. I really like him. And he just goes over everything that has to do with Judaism. He has a bunch of different playlists, so you can like any topic that you're interested in with regards to Judaism. He probably has a playlist for it. So I would highly recommend subscribing to and watching him. Maybe I'll try and contact him and see if he'll do an interview with me. I don't know how likely that is, but check him out. Okay, so I'm gonna be sharing some things that I heard him say as well. Okay, so let's go through it. So these four different groups, these were basically religious and political factions within Judaism at the time of the Romans and after the Greeks. Okay, so on the political side, all four of these groups had a different approach to deal with the Roman problem. Okay, the Pharisees, and the Pharisees seems to have been like the larger group, the more popular group. Their attitude was, okay, we really don't like this. We really don't like that the Romans are here, and something's got to happen, but, we'll just see what happens. Okay. The Sadducees were more, I would say probably accepting of the Roman presence. Their attitude was, there's nothing we can do, so we might as well just go along with it. And I don't know how much they really opposed it in the first place, and I'm going to explain why that is. So, Pharisees against it, Sadducees, apparently against it, but what can we do? The Essenes were another group where they're basically just like, okay, guys, we're going to just go over here and just leave you all alone, and we're just going to do our own thing. And Messiah is going to come anyway, so whatever. And so they were like a kind of like a secluded group, I guess you could say. So sorry. And they were definitely an interesting group. We're going to read the details about all of them. Right now, I'm just giving the brief overview. And then the fourth group was the Zealots. And the Zealots' attitude toward the Romans and other Jews that supported the Romans or were okay with the Romans was, we're going to kill you! We're going to kill... And just like very extreme, like, this is intolerable. Get the heck out of here! Okay, that was the Zealots. So, let's start. I think the best way to start is what I have pulled up are Britannica articles, and I want to read some of these and comment on them. Okay, so Pharisee. And by the way, uh, modern day Judaism seems to mostly have descended from the Pharisee tradition. Okay, the Pharisee tradition. There's not like descendants of Zealots today or Sadducees, or and definitely not Essenes. So the Pharisees are basically the ones that won, even though that's not what they're called today. Um, and I think it's mostly through. I haven't studied too much about rabbinic Judaism, but I think that this is the group, or at least maybe before them, but then into this group is when the rabbis started. I don't know. That's going to have to be a video for another time. Okay, so Pharisee, Jewish history. Sorry, let me take a drink. Hold on, just 1 second. A Pharisee, member of a Jewish religious party that flourished in Palestine during the latter part of the Second Temple period. Yeah, now you remember, so I went over like the basic political landscape of these four groups, but I'm reserving how they differed theologically for these articles, okay? So, sorry, 515 BC to 70 Common Era. So, the later part of this. So, like I said, like a century or two before Christ, and then afterwards. The Pharisees' insistence on the binding force of oral tradition, the unwritten Torah, remains a basic tenet of Jewish theological thought. And the oral Torah, that's the Mishnah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the Mishnah is basically, they realized that they had to write it down after all these just destructions of the people, and they were afraid that it could get lost, so they wrote it down. It's called the Mishnah. When the Mishnah, the first constituent part of the Talmud, was compiled about 200 AD, or Common Era, it incorporated the teachings of the Pharisees on Jewish law. So let me show you something here. You can go to this website, Sefaria, and it has all the Jewish writings. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it has all of them, but at least it has the important ones. You have the Tanakh, and the Tanakh is the Old Testament. That's what they call it. Okay. Within the Tanakh, it's divided into three parts. You have the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, right? You have the Nevi'im, which are the prophets, and then you have the Ketuvim, which are the scriptures or the writings, where you have like, so prophets, I mean, obviously Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, so on and so forth. Ketuvim, Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes. So you get how it's classified. The Nevi'im seem to be even further classified, and I saw this on another website, but I couldn't find it again. But on here, it's saying that the Nevi'im are divided into 3 groups. You have the former, or the prophets former, the prophets latter. So the former ones are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and then latter, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And then you have the 12 minor prophets, like Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, all the way down to Malachi. Okay? But the 3 main divisions are Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. All right? That's the Tanakh, or the Old Testament. Now, along with the written Torah, they believe, at least the Pharisees do, in modern day Judaism, believe that there was an oral Torah that was also given, and that is now contained mostly within the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, uh, has a very lengthy commentary called the Talmud. And the Talmud is basically, there's two Talmuds. There's the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And these are basically the opinions of the sages, rabbis, um, that basically would answer or talk about things in the Mishnah and probably other things. I'm not like an expert yet on Judaism, but that's my current understanding. And then you have, I'm not exactly sure what the Midrash is, but I think that's a further commentary. I could be wrong. Halakha is Jewish law. Okay, so like when we're talking about like Islam with Sharia law, Halakha is Jewish law. Kabbalah are the higher teachings. They are the sometimes it's referred to as Jewish mysticism. And when we're talking about these things, you guys, I think it's good to study these primarily from like a scholarly point of view or from just a academic point of view. It's good to understand Judaism the way that they think. As far as accepting any of this material as doctrine, no, we would stick to our own doctrine, but that's not to say that there can't be truths that are in here, but you have to be careful with that. Okay, you have to be careful with that. Now, I have found, okay, look at this. I should have pulled this up. I'm going to pull up the scripture citation index, search, and then for general conference talks, I'm going to search Talmud. And the Talmud has actually been cited in a number of different general conference talks. Okay. There's been a couple times, I think. Well, actually, I'm not sure because I haven't read each one. But anyway, this has been cited several times. Not a lot, but several times in general conference. Okay. So that's something to think about. Now, again, your primary focus should be the scriptures of the current canon. Okay, the scriptures of the Restoration, Old Testament, New Testament as well. The standard works. Okay, that's where we go to for spiritual learning. Okay, and maybe at a future time, who knows? Maybe there is some stuff in here that might be confirmed by Christ when he comes in the millennium. You don't know. I don't know. When it comes to Kabbalah, I don't know. I've looked into Kabbalah. There's a lot of things that I really like in it. I don't think that it's all completely correct, and I haven't like studied all of it, obviously. But there's things that like ring true to me in this. Okay, there's things that ring true to me in this, but we need to treat it as we currently do, as separate. It's another religion, and then if Christ confirms some of these things in the millennium, then so be it. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes. The rest of these things, I'm not sure what these are, but it has like a little, explanation underneath all these. So that was a long tangent, but let's go back to Pharisees. So they believe, one, in the written Torah and also the oral Torah. Okay, and that's going to set them apart from the Sadducees. Okay. So I would think of the Pharisees as kind of like the common man's Jewish sect or party. The way that Henry Abramson talked about it was that they were the ones that were more in the rural parts of the country and just the common people, and the majority. Okay, that's the Pharisees, and we'll get into the Sadducees in just a minute because that's like the main opposition to the Pharisees. The Zealots and the Essenes are more just like smaller groups, from what I can tell. But the two main groups are Pharisees, Sadducees. All right, let's continue. Okay, so the Talmud was compiled about 200 years after Christ. And I think the Mishnah, I can't remember when that was. Anyway, the Pharisees, in Hebrew, the Pelushim, emerged as a distinct group shortly after the Maccabean revolt around 165 to 160 before Christ. They were, it is generally believed, spiritual descendants of the Hasidians. The Hasidians, they're the ones. Okay, so what happened? Okay, after after Israel came back from Babylon, you think about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I should pull that up. LDS Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, almost. Images. Let's pull this up. This is from the church website. I'm going to open up the image in a separate tab. Okay, so you have to think about it like this. This is a timeline. This statue is a timeline. There's also the animal version of it where Daniel sees the lion with eagle's wings, and then you have after that I think after that was the bear, and then after that was the leopard, and then after that a nondescript beast that had 10 horns. So you have the two versions. Now, the golden head was the Babylonian Empire. The breasts and arms of silver were the Medians and Persians. Okay. And it was at this time that the Israelites returned to the land and rebuilt the temple. And you know that Cyrus was a big part of that. He was part of the Persian Empire. After that, okay, you had Alexander the Great that decided one day to conquer the world. And so he did. And that included Israel. And so the Macedonians, which is a part of Greece, it's like north of Greece, but it's Grecian. They were the next to come in and conquer the land. And they brought with them Hellenism. Hellenism is basically their culture, their aesthetics, their science. It's just like the enlightenment that they received and some of the good things. Their culture, okay, just Hellenism. And the Jews actually really liked it. They liked Hellenism a lot. And they adopted it without, getting rid of their own religion. They adopted it. It's not to say that they started worshiping Greek gods or anything like that. But it got to a point where it was becoming so, the Jewish people were becoming so saturated with it that there was a concern that it was going to override Judaism itself. And so you had two factions. You had one that was all about the Hellenism. Oh yeah, we love this stuff. This is the best. And then you had the others that wanted to preserve Judaism and Jewish culture, religious beliefs, and so forth. And there was essentially a civil war. I think the other side had assistance from the Greeks. I'm not sure on that point. But anyway, what happened was the Jewish side won. And this is where you get the story of the menorah and Hanukkah. Okay, that's where this comes from. And so afterwards, and this is referred to as the Maccabean Revolt and so on and so forth. Afterwards, it was let's go back to the Pharisees. Afterwards, it was the Hasidians or the Hasidian dynasty that took over. And I don't know exactly why, but it seemed like they weren't actually too good. And I'm not going to get into all that. You'll just have to dig deeper. So anyway, it's saying that they are spiritually the descendants of these people, the Jews that fought Hellenism, that fought the Greeks and wanted to preserve Judaism. Okay. All right, moving on. The Pharisees emerged as a party of laymen and scribes in contradistinction to the Sadducees, i.e., the Sadducees were the party of the high priesthood that traditionally provided the sole leadership of the Jewish people. The basic difference that led to the split between the Pharisees and the Sadducees lay in their respective attitudes toward the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses. And the problem of finding in it answers to questions and basis for decisions about contemporary legal and religious matters arising under circumstances far different from those of the time of Moses. See, and here, right here, this is why prophets are needed. This is why we need Nevi'im, right? Because times change, new things come up, and that's something that really sets our church apart. In response to this problem, the Sadducees, on the one hand, refused to accept any precept as binding unless it was based directly on the Torah, the written Torah. Okay, the Pharisees, on the other hand, believed that the law of God gave to Moses was twofold, consisting of the written Torah and the oral Torah, i.e., the teachings of the prophets. And the oral Torah of the Jewish people. So the teachings of the prophets and the oral teaching, or the oral traditions of the Jewish people. So this right here, I believe, would be the Mishnah part, and then you have the prophets in the Tanakh, Old Testament. Whereas the priestly Sadducees taught that the written Torah was the only source of revelation, the Pharisees admitted the principle of evolution in the law. Humans must use their reason in interpreting the Torah and applying it to contemporary problems. And that's how you get the Talmud. The Talmud and probably the Midrash. Again, I don't quite know where to go. I don't quite know what the Midrash says. It says interpretations and elaborations upon biblical texts, including stories, parables, and legal deductions. So it sounds like it's similar to the Talmud. Maybe a little bit broader in scope. Okay. Okay. All right. Rather than blindly follow the letter of the law, even if it conflicted with reason or conscience, the Pharisees harmonized the teachings of the Torah with their own ideas, or found their own ideas suggested or implied in it. They interpreted the law according to its spirit. When in the course of time a law had been outgrown or superseded by changing conditions, they gave it a new and more acceptable meaning, seeking scriptural support for their actions through a ramified system of hermeneutics. I don't know what that is. Who cares? It was it was because of this progressive tendency of the Pharisees that their interpretation of the Torah continued to develop and has remained a living force in Judaism. See, so Henry Abramson has said that that modern day Jews are basically the descendants of the Pharisee movement. Okay. The Pharisees were primarily not a political party, but a society of scholars and pietists. They enjoyed a large popular following, and in the New Testament, they appear as spokesmen for the majority of the population. Okay, so it seems like that they were probably the biggest faction, the most popular. About 100 years before Christ, a long struggle ensued as the Pharisees tried to democratize the Jewish religion and move it from the control of the temple priests. It's interesting that the Sadducees, Henry Abramson said that they basically, the temple cult, and not meaning cult in the way that we think of it, but like the temple close-knit religious group of people, the priests, along with the Sadducees, it's like they were all together. So it's an interesting divide. Okay. The Pharisees asserted that God could and should be worshipped even away from the temple and outside Jerusalem. And, we would agree with that. There's like a lot, I think, that we would agree with the Pharisees. Okay, I know that in the New Testament, when we read the New Testament and about Christ and his interactions with these different groups, that usually the Pharisees, Sadducees, they're portrayed as like the antagonists. And, some of them were. Although I have no doubt that some of them probably did recognize Christ. Because like sometimes like Pharisee has such a strong connotation with enemy of Jesus Christ that I don't think that we realize there's probably people that did, convert essentially. And it's not to say that I think that they were all bad, right? Whenever we think of Pharisee, we think about like the old man with like the nice clothes and being all prideful walking around town. And that probably was the case sometimes, but there were probably some good ones. And it's not to say that the entire movement was bad, because this is right. Like, worshiping outside the temple, that's what we do. We have chapel houses, we have ward houses and stake centers and so forth. Um, and we don't just stay in small geographic areas. We did in the early days of the church out of necessity, but not now. Anyway, continuing, to the Pharisees, worship consisted not in bloody sacrifices, the practice of the temple priest, but in prayer and in the study of God's law. Now, I don't know if that's to say, okay, to the Pharisees, worship consisted not in bloody sacrifices. That's an odd statement because I'm pretty sure they still went to the temple and did what they were supposed to do. So I don't know. Continuing. Hence, the Pharisees fostered the synagogue as an institution of religious worship, outside and separate from the temple. The synagogue may thus be considered a Pharisaic institution since the Pharisees developed it, raised it to a high eminence, and gave it a central place in Jewish religious life. Okay, and that's what we have today. Further evidence that modern day Judaism basically descends through the Pharisaic line. Okay, and if you were a Jew at the time, by the way, if you didn't realize yet that Christ was the Messiah, and you were just kind of seeing things, you would assume that Christ was a Pharisee. That's the group that he would fit in from an outside point of view. Now, from our point of view, being disciples of Christ, we wouldn't put Christ in any of these categories because he was the Messiah. He doesn't belong to a faction created by man. He is categorically something different. Okay, that's what we believe. But at the time of back then, if you had not yet accepted the gospel or recognized him, you would have seen Christ as a Pharisee. He definitely wasn't a Zealot. He wasn't a Sadducee, and he definitely was not an Essene because we'll read about the Essenes. Okay, so so Pharisees. Now let's look at the main opposing group, the Sadducees. Okay, Sadducee, Hebrew, Sadok, plural, Sadokim. Member of a Jewish priestly sect that flourished about 2 centuries before the destruction of the Second Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Not much is known of the Sadducees' origin and early history, but their name may be derived from that of Zadok, who was high priest in the time of Kings David and Solomon. That's interesting. So it's like the Zadokites, Ezekiel later selected his family as worthy of being entrusted with control of the temple, and Zadokites formed the temple hierarchy down to the 2nd century BCE. The Sadducees were the party of high priests, aristocratic families, and merchants, the wealthier elements of the population. So there you have it. They're basically like the elite, both religiously and, probably politically and by wealth. Whereas the Pharisees would have been more the common man people. Okay, they came under the influence of Hellenism. Okay, that's what we were talking about before, going back to King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. This right here, the Hellenism during Alexander the Great and the Greeks, they liked it. Now I don't know, but most likely the Sadducees would have fallen on the other side of the conflict. like, no, Hellenism, it's great, instead of being with the part of the Maccabean revolt. And I can't say that for sure, but that's what it sounds like to me. Um, okay, so they came under the influence of Hellenism. I like how that's said too, because it's like a drug or alcohol. They came under the influence of Hellenism, tended to have good relations with the Roman rulers of Palestine, and generally represented the conservative view within Judaism. While their rivals, the Pharisees, claimed the authority of piety and learning, the Sadducees claimed that of birth and social and economic position. During the long period of the two-party struggle, which lasted until the Romans' destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Sadducees dominated the temple and its priesthood. So, you know, if it was me, I would feel kind of uncomfortable with that situation, that you have one party that controls the temple, probably most of the priests, as well as the high priest are Sadducees, and I'd be kind of upset about that, because I wouldn't want there to be that kind of division. That doesn't seem right. But that's how it was. Okay, the Sadducees and Pharisees were in constant conflict with each other, not only over numerous details of ritual and the law, but most importantly over the content and extent of God's revelation to the Jewish people. The Sadducees refused to go beyond the written Torah. To me, that's pretty weird, because you have an entire Tanakh, and you only want to stick with the first 5 books. And thus, unlike the Pharisees, denied the immortality of the soul, bodily resurrection after death, and according to the Acts of the Apostles, the 5th book of the New Testament, the existence of angelic spirits. And I'm sure that that's something that most everybody knows, that they didn't believe in the resurrection, and Christ interacted with them in regards to that. So, I don't know if it seems to me like it's weird because they're in charge of the temple mostly, but it seems almost like they're more secular. They're under the influence of power, wealth, elitism, and they don't believe some of the more miraculous things of the scriptures, like resurrection. So you think of just like this wealthy, aristocratic, just very worldly sounding, like they're just enjoying life, and Hellenism, and now the Romans, yeah, and money, and whatever, resurrection. What just, I don't know. That could be a incorrect portrayal, but that's what it sounds like to me when I study this. For the Sadducees, the oral law, i.e., the vast body of post-biblical Jewish legal traditions, the Mishnah and the Talmud and so forth, meant next to nothing. By contrast, the Pharisees revered the Torah, but further claimed that oral tradition was part and parcel of Mosaic law. And the explanation for that, you guys, is because, like, when you're reading the Old Testament, and it's talking about you're commanded to do, this kind of sacrifice, or you're commanded to do this, it doesn't really explain specifically how to perform that thing. And so the belief is that the oral tradition contained exactly what to do, how to perform that commandment, that ritual, that ceremony, whatever it was. Okay, because of their strict adherence to the written law, the Sadducees acted severely in cases involving the death penalty, and they interpreted literally the Mosaic principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Though the Sadducees were conservative in religious matters, their wealth, their haughty bearing, and their willingness to compromise with the Roman rulers aroused the hatred of the common people. Yeah, of course it did. As defenders of the status quo, look at that, defenders of the status quo, the Sadducees viewed the ministry of Jesus with considerable alarm and apparently played some role in his trial and death. Their lives and political authority were so intimately bound up with temple worship that after Roman legions destroyed the temple, the Sadducees ceased to exist as a group, and mention of them quickly disappeared from history. So, and that's the way that worldly people go, right? They're like a big deal for a while in a worldly sense. They're winning at the game, but then when it's all said and done, everything goes with them. You know, it's like when my dad passed away, he had accrued a lot of different things, collections and items and lots of nice stuff. And when I went there, when he passed away, I was just perplexed and astounded at how quickly all that stuff went away. You know, some of it we had to sell, some of it was divided up between people. But I was amazed because, like, I'd known my dad my whole life and seen all these things accumulating, and it felt like it was just like such a long time in the making. And then literally over just a couple days, it was all gone. It was all gone. You know, and that's what this world is. You know, you think that you're doing really good at life, you have possessions, you have worldly honors or whatever. uh, when you die, it's gone. It goes away. And it was basically all for nothing. Not all for nothing. I mean, you can enjoy it while you're living, but it really doesn't mean anything once you're gone. It all dissolves like instantly. And looks like that's what happened to the Sadducees, the ones that liked, you know, the nice life. If there were some kind of secret combinations going on back then, and I'm sure there was, secret combinations have been present throughout the entire history of the world. It just happens. You have people that work together to gain and maintain wealth, power, control. They're probably the ones that would have been most involved in secret combinations, most likely. And that's talking in a general sense. But anyway, okay, so Pharisees, the common man, the majority, the populace; Sadducees, the elite, the wealthy, the ones that enjoyed Hellenism and worldliness. Okay, now let's talk about the Zealots, and there's not a whole lot to say, but it says here, Zealot, member of a Jewish sect, noted for its uncompromising opposition to pagan Rome and the polytheism it professed. The Zealots were an aggressive political party whose concern for the national and religious life of the Jewish people led them to despise even Jews who sought peace and conciliation with Roman authorities. A census of Galilee ordered by Rome in 6 AD spurred the Zealots to rally the populace to non-compliance on the grounds that agreement was an implicit acknowledgement by Jews of the right of pagans to rule their nation. Extremists among the Zealots, as if they probably weren't extreme enough, turned to that word that starts with a T and assassination and became known as Sicari, or daggermen. That's a Greek word, Sicari. They frequented public places with hidden daggers to strike down persons friendly to Rome. Oh my goodness. So that you don't mess with them, and you don't want to be on their radar. In the first revolt against Rome, 66 to 70 AD, the Zealots played a leading role at Masada. In 73 AD, they committed suicide rather than surrender the fortress. And That's basically known, Masada. That's like basically the Jewish Alamo. Okay. So that's all there really is to say about them. And then the Essenes. Okay. The ones that just kind of quietly just left, okay, whatever. You're all going to be destroyed when Messiah comes anyway. Okay, Essene, member of the religious sect of or brotherhood that flourished in Palestine from about 2nd century BC to the end of the 1st century AD. The New Testament does not mention them, and accounts given by Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder sometimes differ in significant details, perhaps indicating a diversity that existed among the Essenes themselves. See, just because there were like different accounts of like, well, I observed this, well, I observed that. So there could have been a diversity. The Essenes clustered in monastic communities that generally, at least, excluded women. Property was held in common, and all details of daily life were regulated by officials. The Essenes were never numerous. Pliny fixed their number at some $4,000. $4,000. 4,000 in his day. Like the Pharisees, the Essenes meticulously observed the law of Moses, the Sabbath, and ritual purity. So, yeah. They also professed belief in immortality and divine punishment for sin. But unlike the Pharisees, the Essenes denied the resurrection of the body and refused to immerse themselves in public life. So they were recluses. They also didn't believe in the resurrection. With few exceptions, they shunned temple worship and were content to live ascetic lives of manual labor in seclusion. The Sabbath was reserved for long day-long prayer and meditation on the Torah. Oaths were frowned upon, but once taken, they could not be rescinded. After a year's probation, proselytes received their Essenian emblems, but could not participate in common meals for 2 more years. Those who qualified for membership were called upon to swear piety to God, justice toward men, hatred of falsehood, love of truth, and faithful observance of all other tenets of the Essene sect. Thereafter, new converts were allowed to take their noon and evening meals in silence with others. So they were basically a bunch of weirdos. And then following the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, late 40s and 50s, in the vicinity of Khirbat Qumran, most scholars have agreed that the Qumran community was Essenian. So I looked in, because that's how I knew them, the Essenes, was because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm sure that's how most people learned of them. But according to this Wikipedia article, it says, according to Josephus, the Essenes were settled not in one city, but in large numbers in every town. Philo speaks of more than 4,000 living in Palestine and Syria, more precisely in many cities of Judea and in many villages and grouped in great societies of many numbers. Pliny locates them on the west side of the Dead Sea, away from the coast, above the town of Engedi. Some modern scholars and archaeologists have argued that Essenes inhabited the settlement of Qumran, a plateau in the Judean desert along the Dead Sea, citing Pliny the Elder in support and giving credence that the Dead Sea Scrolls are the product of the Essenes. This theory, though not yet conclusively proven, has come to dominate the scholarly discussion and public perception of the Essenes. Okay, so they were living in Jewish communities all over the place, but it seems that there was a community right here in Qumran. Okay, so see where it is. Here's Jerusalem directly to the west of there, and then right by the Dead Sea. If you were to compare this to Utah, like I like to do, Qumran would be kind of like in this area right here where nobody lives, west of the airport, kind of by Antelope Island. So yeah, just a bunch of weirdos. But we have them to thank for the Dead Sea Scrolls, and yeah, so that's who they were. So these are the four main factions, sects, parties, whatever divisions within Judaism at that time. And again, the more popular one by far would be the Pharisees. And if you were a Jewish person at the time and you were observing Christ, you would have regarded him as a Pharisee of that tradition. So hope that answers some questions. I think it's really interesting. It's interesting to see that just that diversity of beliefs and stuff. Obviously, not all of them survived. But even today, you know, there's still some divisions within Judaism. You have, like, for example, right now in Israel, I'm going to try and remember because I did a video about this. There's four main groups, okay? You have one that is just secular Jews. They're Jewish by, you know, descent and culture, but little else. So you have them, and I think they're called the Hilonim. I think the Hilonim. And then you have another group that's more. Okay, so that's one extreme. Okay, the seculars. On the other extreme, you have ultra Orthodox, so-called, or the Haredim, and okay, how do I explain this? So within Israel, and I think worldwide, you have Orthodox Jews, right? But it seems like Orthodox Jews are divided into two groups. You have the regular Orthodox Jews, and that's who I interviewed recently, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. He was an Orthodox Jew. But you have further beyond that, the other group, the ultra Orthodox, called the Haredi. And they, from what I've seen, mostly keep to themselves. They don't even like really intermarry with other Jewish groups. So they're ultra Orthodox. Okay. So between the two Orthodox groups and the Hilonim, or the seculars, you have, I can't remember what they're called. I think they're called the Dati. No, maybe they're the Masortim. And they are kind of just like more, their appearance is more modern, like, you know, the wear t-shirts, collared shirts. They don't always dress in like black and white shirts and ties, black fedoras and stuff like that. They just dress like normal Western people, but they still wear like the kippah and stuff like that. Okay, so you have that group too. Excuse me. In America, it's kind of the same, but it seems like over here what you have is three groups. You have Orthodox, and then you have Conservative, and then Reform. Those are like the three main groups. Within Reform, I think there's also another one called Reconstructionist, which is similar to Reform. And I think also in America you have like the two types of Orthodox as well, but generally you think about it in the three groups. So anyway, that's kind of what Judaism looks like today. But back in the time of Christ, those were the four main groups to be aware of. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share this with anyone that has the same kind of question or wants to know more about these groups. And I'll talk to you guys later.